Hello, Nathan here with Tabletop Apprentice. Welcome to our T1 series video, The Barbarian. This series is going to show you the basics of painting while trying to keep the number of paints down to keep the cost cheap while you get started in the hobby. Now, if you are comfortable with painting, then go ahead, try mixing up some of the colors that I used and make the model your own. Have some fun with it. But if this is your first time picking up a brush, I would recommend that you follow along with this tutorial video and the mini I've chosen. It's a great mini to get learning and get started. And of course, if the Barbarian isn't up your alley, that's okay. The entire T1 series exists just for you. We're going to be doing a large variety of role-playing and wargaming minis in the coming weeks. Now, let's just take a quick review of the paints that we're going to use on this mini before we get started. You're going to need Bugman's Glow, Kislev Flesh, Lead Belcher, Mornfang Brown, Steel Legion Drab, Xandri Dust, and Nuln Oil. And optionally, you can get your hands on White Scar, Warplock Bronze, Corn Red, Abaddon Black, and Reikland Flesh Shade. For the bare minimum of getting a good-looking model, you're looking at about $40. And if you're looking to replicate exactly what I did in this video, you're looking at an extra $30 in cost. And of course, you don't have to get all the optional paints right away. You can just pick a couple of them up because you like particular colors or looks on the model that you want to replicate. Now, without further ado, let's hop right into it.
So today we're going to be working on Goldar the Barbarian, and I'll put a link in the doobly-doo if you want to go ahead and pick him up. And I just want to say, the Barbarian is going to be fantastic for any of you that want to practice working on your flesh tones, because we have this massive canvas area and these highly defined muscles, which is going to make it really easy for first-timers to learn. So first things first, we're going to be putting down a base coat of Bugman's Glow, and you can be really messy with this. Again, we do our flesh tones first because it allows us to be messy, and since it's got so much flesh on it, you can just really lay it down. If you want to use your dry brush instead of your base brush, you can 100% go ahead and do that and really speed this process up. And don't forget to really make sure that you've gotten all of his flesh when you're going ahead and doing this. There's that little area on his arm between the bracer and his shoulder pad. Just make sure that you do go ahead and get your paint in there. And with our base of Bugman's Glow down, we're going to be moving on to our layer, which we're going to be dry brushing onto him, and we're going to be using Kislev Flesh. So for those of you that don't know what dry brushing is, you want to load up some paint on your brush and then rub it off on a palette, your thumb, a paper towel, whatever you have available, and just make sure that you get all the wet paint off of your brush, but you're still going to have the remnants of the dried paint, and then you're just going to flick that lightly across the model, and you can see that we get some really fantastic definition from all of his muscles and skin. And just a side note, when you are going around to doing his hands and stuff like that, make sure that you're painting against the knuckles or across the knuckles and not along with the knuckles, because you're going to get a lot better definition by doing this. And with that done super duper fast, we can move off of our skin tone because it's already done, and we're going to move on to his shoulder pad next, and we're using Lead Belcher right here. And again, I'm going to break up the colors on this model, and I'm only painting the bottom rivets there, Lead Belcher, and we're going to be painting the actual large part of the shoulder pad a different color. And as always, make sure to really twist and look around your model. Make sure that you get all of the edge lines and ridges. If you need to pull out your detail brush to make sure that you can get it nice and close, go ahead and do that. There's no rush when you're doing your painting when it comes to the quality that you want to get out of it. And here's an extra step for those of you that want to experiment a little bit and see what else you can do with your model and doing paints and stuff. We're taking Abaddon Black, and once again we're going to be doing dry brushing, and we're just going to lightly dry brush the black across the metal parts of that armband, and it's going to make it look a little bit more worn and a little bit more rugged, and that's kind of what we're going to be wanting to go with this Barbarian, because, you know, he's a barbarian. He shouldn't have shiny, bright armor. And with that done, let's just quickly finish up the middle bit of a shoulder pad here, and we're going to be pulling out our Warplock Bronze, and we're just going to be using that on the 6 little bolts across that middle bit of the armband. Now let's move on to finishing up this shoulder pad. So you can really have a lot of fun with this yourself. You can choose nearly any color and it's going to look really nice because it's going to have this really nice non-symmetrical look to it. Just make sure that you choose a really passionate color like red or blue or yellow, something that really invokes and draws your eye to it. or go with something a lot more drab. I'm using Steel Legion drab here because I really wanted to get this rugged look out of my barbarian. And as always, if you need to pull out your detail brush to make sure that you can cover everything so that you don't damage the nice skin tone that we've already finished, go ahead and do that. That is no problem. And once again, here's another optional bit. The more colors that you have laying on top of each other, the nicer the model's going to look, because the more that those colors break up and look a little bit more natural. So I wanted to make things a little bit more rugged and looks like they have actually been worn out and stuff like that. So here's two really good options for the Steel Legion drab, Talaran Sand and Xandri Dust. And I ended up going with Talaran Sand just because it's got a little bit more yellow of a hue and it's not as bright as the Xandri Dust. So once again, we're going to dry brush it and then just lightly go around the very edges of the shoulder pad just to give it that kind of worn out look. So after I had finished doing all the dry brushing, I felt that it just wasn't quite enough. I wanted to add a little bit more to it because he's still a hero. I didn't want him to look too basic. So this is where, once again, you get some really good creative license over your own models. I went and grabbed a piece of paper and just started doodling around with some lines and some breakups for those lines for how it might look. And then I just went ahead and picked one and started painting it on the model. And I decided red would be a good choice. We're using corn red here because it's nice and evocative and it's very passionate and eye-drawing color. I will admit doing these perfectly straight lines can be really difficult for beginners, and one of the few pieces of advice I can give you is just make sure that you have as many pieces that you can brace against the model as you can. Have your hand resting against the table that's holding the model so that it's not shaking, you're not having to hold it up in front of you, and do the same with your paintbrush. Just make sure that you try and do everything you can, that you're not actually holding it in midair, you've got something nice that you can brace it up against to make sure that you keep your hand a little bit steadier. And one of the other important things is that you don't want too much paint on your brush when you're going to do this, and you can see that I went and dipped my brush against my thumb a little bit. That was just to remove a little bit of the excess paint that was hanging on the brush, just so there wasn't a big gloob. And you go and put that on the model and it starts a really thick line, and then as you bring it down, that gloob of paint wears out, and then you're left with a thin line, which 100% can be used for some really cool looking things, but it is a little bit more difficult to control. Then, after I actually started putting it down on the model and I used the red, I decided, you know what, that's not enough. I went and grabbed my Abaddon Black there and I just added a couple more lines to help add some more color and a little bit more variety into his shoulder pad, and I think it turned out really nice. Which is one of the great things about having these big blank canvas areas on your models like this shoulder pad, is that you just get to have fun with it, you know? You can make a mistake and always paint over it, so go nuts. Try some things out and see if they work. If not, oh well, but if they do, that's awesome. But anyways, let's get this tutorial video back on track. So we're going to move on to his arm bracers there, and we're going to be using Mornfang Brown first. And just quickly lay it on. Nothing fancy here, so let's just skip ahead. So with that done, we're going to move on to the fur coming out the bottom and top of his bracers. And there are a lot of options that you can get when it comes to fur, and I will move on to teaching some of the other ones that I know later on. But this time we're just going to go with a lighter fur to nicely complement the dark brown of the bracers. So we're going to start with Xandri Dust as our base. And you're probably going to want to use your detail brush for this just because it is a really small part on the model. And the one tip that I can give you is just kind of try and paint against the grooves and then with the grooves to make sure that you can get into all the little crooks and crannies that are inside fur. And when you're done that, we're just going to quickly finish off his bracers here because he's got two buckles or buttons, however you want to envision it, on one of his bracers. So we're going to use Lead Belcher and just put it on there quickly. Then we're going to move on to the harness across his chest and back, and we're going to be using Mornfang Brown for that one. And just a quick side note, for those of you that did watch the night video, you'll recall that I said that I usually work on my models from bottom to top, but there are some cases where I work from top to bottom. With this one, we did flesh tones first, and that covered the top of the model, and I just worked from the top down then. No particular reason why I do it one way or another. It's really just what's more convenient, what's easier for you. Figure it out for yourself. Everybody's different. Alright, so let's just zip through his acts really quickly here, because there's a lot of video to go, and, I need to speed this thing up. So we're going to do the handle first, and we did that in Scrag Brown, and then we're going to hop over, and we did Lead Belcher across the blade, and then another hop there, and we got over to Warplock Bronze to, once again, separate the colors. And then one last quick hop, and we grabbed our Lead Belcher there, and just quickly dotted out the bolts on the axe head, and quickly just did the metal straps on the harness there. Now with that out of the way, the top part of the model's done, and we can start working on the bottom part of the model. That's where everything's really going to start coming together. So I went and used Xandri Dust once again for our fur. I did that for his loincloth, and then the fur on the back of his boots there. And for you, those of you that follow my content, you will know that I have a very organic painting style to discover the colors I use on a model. So instead of walking you through the steps that I went through, I'm going to walk you through the steps in an easier way than how I did it. So like I said, we started with the fur on his loincloth and leggings with Xandri Dust, and then we moved on to a light dry brush of white scar over top of that. Then we can move on to corn red for this cloth bit down here, and once again, this is another great section to exert your artistic freedom. You can use any color you want on this section, and it's still going to look good. And then next we can move on to his leggings, which we're using Steel Legion Drab for, and that's just more of that rugged variation of brown that we're using across this barbarian to make him look really rugged. Now just stay with me because we're starting to get to the home stretch here. We're going to be using Lead Belcher next, and we're using that on his boots, and we're going to be applying that to all the base areas of his boots. Once again, remember the lowest to highest rule, which means we're going to be applying it to all the lowest parts of the boots. And then we're going to be moving on to Warplock Bronze, and we're going to be using that to help accentuate the colors on his boots, use that for all the trimmings and all the high points, and that's just to help get that color breakup on your model. So you don't need Warplock Bronze, but it's going to help things look a bit nicer. And finally, we move on to all the miscellaneous bits that we missed across the model. And for the most part, that's usually belts and buckles for me. So we're using Mournfang Brown, and we're just touching up and making sure that we get all the belts across him. So the belt across his waist and the belts across the back of his legs that help hold everything together. And next up, we're just going to quickly do the base under him, and we're going to be using Steel Legion Drab for the most of it, and then we're going to go ahead and dry brush that with some Xandri Dust. And then, boom, you've got your finished product here. Almost. Because our last step here is going to be just applying the wash, and that's going to be super fast and super easy. So first we're going to be using Reichland Flesh Shade, and we're going to be doing that across all the flesh tones, all the bare skin on him. Now, if you don't have Reichland Flesh Shade, you can use Null Oil. You'll just get a very different looking flesh tone. The Reichland Flesh Shade provides a much more natural, warm looking flesh tone, while the Null Oil is going to get you a more almost undead looking flesh tone. So keep that in mind if you want to do some painting undead. And now that we've waited a little bit for our Reichland Flesh Shade to dry, we're going to go on and move over to the next wash that we're going to be using, and that's Null Oil. And we're going to apply that to everywhere that we didn't apply the Reichland Flesh Shade, so, his shoulder, his fur, the leggings, all that jazz, and then you're going to come out with a really fantastic looking model. And that's it. We've got Goldar the Barbarian and Baron Blacktree finished. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this and or found it helpful. And I hope you'll continue the journey that we take together as we finish the T1 series. Until next time, later, Internet.